divisiveness can prevail. Today, give our lawmakers a union with you that will transform their lives to become mirrors of your divine attributes. Provide them with the divine traits of humility, patience, and perseverance as you fill them with a peace that the world cannot give or take away. We pray in your marvelous name. Amen.
Will you please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session and resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, National Transportation Safety Board, John D. Liu of Texas to be a member.
Mr. President,
I recognize the senator from Iowa.
a few days ago, I stood here and congratulated Lithuania on its Independence Day. Well, there's another Baltic state that has Independence Day yesterday, the country of Estonia. Just as we celebrate Independence Day on the anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, yesterday marked the anniversary of Estonia's Declaration of Independence in 1980. The United States established diplomatic relations with Estonia 4 years later in 1992, and that recognition and relationship with Estonia has continued uninterrupted until today. That's right. We even had accredited Estonian diplomats working in the United States throughout the 50 years that Estonia was illegally occupied by the Soviet Union, and Moscow considered Estonia as a legitimate part of the Soviet Union. So we never gave up on Estonia's freedom. That's something that we Americans can be proud of, standing by our friends. Today, Estonia is very free, very prosperous, and very pro-American. Yesterday was also a more somber anniversary. 4 years ago, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russian forces reached the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv in an attempt to overthrow the democratic elected government of Ukraine. As we know, that failed due to the courageous and determination of the Ukrainian people, who were able immediately to push back Russian forces out of at least half the territory that they initially took. Russian troops have failed to make any major breakthrough, taking tiny amounts of territory at the cost of tens of thousands of Russian lives. Those losses would be unsustainable for any country that values the lives of its people, or that must answer to its citizens for its actions in democratic countries. What was supposed to be only a 3-day military operation has been 4 years of all-out warfare. Ukrainians are going without power or without heat in sub-zero temperatures because Russia has targeted civilian power plants. Churches in Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine have been closed, and Christians have been persecuted if they do not accept the authority of the Russian Orthodox Church and its KBG leader of that church, who answers only to Putin. But just like the brave Estonians, for now 100 years plus, under the Soviet occupation, Ukrainians will never concede their sovereignty, and they will never give up on their countrymen who are currently suffering under brutal Russian occupation. Just like we did for Estonia, we ought to not give up on Ukrainian freedom and independence, and the United States should do everything it can to make sure that the Ukrainian people are helped to preserve their country and preserve their freedom. Nothing more could be more American. I yield the floor. Suggests the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President.
I recognize the Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, before I begin, I want to mention Special Agent Eden Holguin, a member of the Capitol Police's Dignitary Protection Division who passed away last week following a brief illness. It is men and women like Special Agent Holguin who allow us to complete our work here each day in safety. And I'm profoundly grateful for his service and for that of our other Capitol Police officers. And my prayers today are with Special Agent Holguin's loved ones and his family. Mr. President, it was a pleasure to hear from President Trump last night on some of the achievements of his first year in office and his continued plans to make life better for hardworking Americans. It's something to remember the situation the President was facing 13 months ago when he took office. America and Americans had been through a lot under President Biden, a historic inflation crisis and the worst border crisis on record. And on top of that, hardworking Americans were facing the prospect of a $2.6 trillion tax hike in 2026. President Trump and Republicans took office last January determined to turn the page on these crises. We knew things weren't going to get fixed overnight, but we also knew that we could do a lot to make life better for hardworking Americans. And we got right to work. A prime order of business was stopping that $2.6 trillion tax hike on hardworking Americans, starting, or something I should say we achieved with our signature 2025 legislation, the Working Families Tax Cuts. But we weren't going to stop there. We were determined to put more money in Americans' families' pockets. And that, Mr. President, is exactly what we did. In addition to preventing a $2.6 trillion tax hike and making permanent the tax relief Republicans passed in 2017, the Working Families Tax Cuts implemented a slew of additional tax relief. We increased the child tax credit by hundreds of dollars and linked it to inflation so its value will never go down. We boosted the standard deduction, which is claimed by 90% of taxpayers in this country. We instituted a new $6,000 bonus deduction for lower and middle income seniors. We implemented no tax on tips and overtime, allowing hardworking Americans from nurses to rideshare drivers to keep more of their own money. And more. And Americans are already seeing this relief in the form of bigger tax refunds. But the Working Families Tax Cuts didn't end with tax relief, Mr. President. We repealed Democrats' natural gas tax and took steps to unleash American energy production to ensure that Americans have a stable, plentiful, and affordable supply of energy. We took measures to modernize the farm safety net, something very important to the financial well-being of farmers in my state of South Dakota and around the country. And of course, the Working Families Tax Cuts also address border security and national defense. Thanks to President Trump's work to stem the national security crisis at our southern border, encounters at our southern border are currently a tiny fraction of what they were under President Biden. And unlike under President Biden, individuals apprehended attempting to cross our southern border are not being released into the interior of the country. And the Working Families Tax Cuts bill helps ensure that we have the resources to maintain this kind of secure border for the long term. Mr. President, the Working Families Tax Cuts may have been our signature legislation last year, but it's far from the only thing we've been doing to help make life affordable, more affordable for hardworking Americans. The President and Congress have taken action to repeal a number of burdensome rules and regulations that would have driven up energy and appliance prices in this country. In this year's health care appropriations bill, we prioritize measures to make prescriptions less expensive at the pharmacy. And we're looking to soon take up major housing legislation to make home ownership more affordable and accessible for everyday Americans. My Democrat colleagues may talk a good game about helping hardworking Americans, but Republicans are actually putting in the work. We're putting more money in Americans' pockets and working hard to make life affordable for American families. And as President Trump made clear last night, we are just getting started. Mr. President, before I close, the President awarded medals to several military members last night, including the Medal of Honor to South Dakota native Royce Williams. Then Lieutenant Williams heroically took on multiple Soviet MiGs during action off the Korean Peninsula in 1952, hitting not one but several of the aircraft before piloting his own heavily damaged plane back to an American aircraft carrier. I know from personal experience, my dad, that South Dakota has produced some incredible naval aviators, and we are incredibly proud of our South Dakota heroes, including Mr. Williams. And Mr. President, we are grateful for their service. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President,
I recognize
I
the
ask
Democrat
unanimous
leader.
consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last night was not America's State of the Union. It was Donald Trump's state of delusion. For 2 long hours, the President stood in the House chamber congratulating himself, inflating his own ego, but offering no solutions to our country's many problems. He's in a bubble. He doesn't even have a clue about what the average American family is going through. Donald Trump patted himself on the back so many times, I thought he'd fall down. While Donald Trump kept claiming that America is back and that we're, quote, winning so much we don't know what to do about it, that's only half true. We are not winning so much, but he sure has no idea what to do about the problems in America, and he admitted it right there himself. People back home were asking something different than what the speech addressed. They're asking, what about my electricity bill? How am I going to pay for my groceries? How am I going to afford a doctor? Donald Trump ignored all these things during his speech last night. Frankly, I've never heard a State of the Union speech, and I've heard quite a few, where the president's rhetoric and the country's reality were so far apart. Instead, Donald Trump spent most of his speech focused on the accomplishments not of his administration, but on the accomplishments of other Americans whose accomplishments he has nothing to do with. We're all proud of the men and women hockey teams that just won golds in the Olympics. We're all proud and grateful of our veterans. They deserve honor. But Donald Trump didn't have anything to do with these accomplishments. He had so little to say about what he accomplished that he had to just go on and on about accomplishments of others. And folks back home want to hear about what the president is doing to help with their problems. They don't want to hear a fantasy that everything is going great. But it got worse. Trump didn't simply ignore the affordability crisis, he mocked it yet again. The average American sitting at their table trying to figure out how they're going to pay that damn bill was furious that he said it doesn't matter. It's truly stunning to watch a billionaire like Donald Trump make fun of people's financial struggles during a State of the Union speech. The guy doesn't have a clue. He's in a bubble so thick he can't hear what people are going through. And of course, he lied about the economy. This man is an inveterate liar. Everyone knows that. He said last night that manufacturing jobs gone way up. That's a lie. Manufacturing is down by 100,000 jobs since he took office. He bragged last night about job creation. Well, job creation is at its lowest point in over 20 years outside of a recession. Its lowest point in 20 years, and he brags about it. Donald Trump claimed that the fight against inflation is over. That's a lot of BS. Just go to the grocery store, and you'll see. Donald Trump's speech was filled with fluff and hype. When was the last time Trump bought a cup of coffee? When is the last time Trump walked into a grocery store? His speech shows that he never has. It was also rich last night to hear Donald Trump announce that he'll put J.D. Vance in charge of investigating corruption. Now, I think putting J.D. Vance in charge of corruption is actually something that might work out, because he's right, he's in the midst of it, he's all around it. And I've got some suggestions for where he can begin. If Vice President Vance wants to investigate corruption, he should look into the billionaires who are donating to Donald Trump's fancy ballroom. He should look into how so many within the administration are making a killing, a personal killing off crypto deals. He should investigate why Donald Trump pardoned the ex-president of Honduras who was convicted of drug trafficking. If he wants to look into corruption, let him investigate the luxury jet Donald Trump received as a gift from the Middle East. He's got a lot to do right around him. if he wants to investigate corruption, because this is the most corrupt administration, I think, ever. Certainly in decades and maybe over a century. If J.D. Vance wants to get to the bottom of corruption in government, the good news is that all he has to do is walk down the hall into the Oval Office. So in sum, last night did what he does better than anyone else, one of the few things he does better than anyone else. He boosted his own ego and patted himself on the back. Didn't address the needs of Americans and just broke promise after promise after promise. If anyone watching last night was hoping to hear about how Donald Trump is going to lower their costs and their economic pain, his speech was an anemic dud. So I suggest Americans who care about the high cost of living, about affordability, which Trump knocks, get a copy of Governor Spanberger's speech. She focused on it like a bullseye. Her speech was so much more in tune with where the American people are at than Donald Trump's. The contrast is glaring. And I also want to salute Senator Padilla. He gave an outstanding speech as well. Compare Trump's speech to their speech, and you'll know why Trump is in such trouble with the American people. You know why the Republican Party is panicking about what might happen in November of 2026. Now, one more sad note, the passing of Special Agent Eden Holguin. Today, the entire Senate honors the memory and service of a great American, Special Agent Eden Holguin, who passed away last week after a sudden illness. Special Agent Holguin joined the Capitol Police Force in May of 2023. He was assigned to the Capitol Division's First Responders Unit and House Chambers Section before he was detailed to the Dignitary Protection Division. These are hard jobs. They demand immense personal sacrifice, time away from home, from loved ones, long hours, and sometimes dangerous situations. But most of all, they're indispensable, necessary, vital jobs. And it's because of people like Special Agent Holguin that the rest of us who come to the Capitol are safe, and he fulfilled his duties with dignity and with honor. Today, the Senate grieves the passing of this great person. We give thanks that he served the United States Congress and the American people so admirably for 3 wonderful years. We pray for his family, for his friends, his colleagues. And as always, to every single member of the Capitol Police, we say thank you. We stand with you, we join with you in remembering the memory of Special Agent Holguin. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
she. I recognize the Majority Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor having just heard the minority leader, and he talked about the State of the Union address last night. I heard the same speech that he did. I thought it was outstanding. Apparently, the difference is that I was actually listening. The American people agree with me in terms of what they saw and heard and witnessed last night with Donald Trump's State of the Union. What Americans saw last night was quite simple. Republicans stood with them. Democrats didn't. They didn't stand for much. Republicans cheered for lower taxes, for safe communities, and for safer elections, secure elections, elections people had faith in. Senator Schumer said he thought that the speech was delusional. American people didn't think that. Immediately after the State of the Union, CNN conducted a poll. Here's what they found. 62% of the viewers said that President Trump's economic and immigration policies would move the country in the right direction. That's what we've been trying to do for the last year, get the country back on track. Those are the common sense policies for which the Democrats refused to stand. The President said to the whole body, he said, if you agree with this statement, then stand up and show your support. He then read the statement. The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. Every Republican stood up, not the Democrats. They sat silently. This is the first responsibility of a government of a nation, to protect its citizens. Why in the world would Democrats refuse to stand for such a statement, such a basic understanding of what the role of government is in our lives, what our founding fathers fought for? Revolutionary War. Here we are 250 years into the United States, and the Democrats in the Senate and the House and the chamber last night don't believe that that's the responsibility of government, the number one first duty, to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens? That is delusional on the part of the Democrats. It's astonishing. I'm happy to see CNN report that so many Americans agreed that we're getting the country back on track, doing what we should do, what we were elected to do, to provide safety and prosperity for the American people. What are the Democrats staying for? Raising taxes. They sit on their hands when it comes to protecting American citizens. Their priorities are wrong. We're in a shutdown right now for the Department of Homeland Security. Why? Because they want to stand with illegal immigrant criminals instead of the safety and security of the American people. And to me, Mr. President, that was the most telling moment of the evening. And the American people will not forget that. They will not forget that visual. They will not forget seeing the President of the United States make his statement, and the Republicans jump up and cheer, and the Democrats sit in silence. Mr. President, last night we heard about the great American comeback. The President's remark proved two things. Our country is strong, and our fellow citizens, boy, they are courageous. And we have heard great stories of courage last night. More than a dozen heroes were honored, rightfully so. Heroes like a 100-year-old Navy pilot, retired Captain Royce Williams, and helicopter pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Eric Slover, both of whom received the Congressional Medal of Honor. Well earned, well done, well deserved. Heroes like Pennsylvania mom Megan Hemhauser, who homeschools her 2 children and works in the evenings as a waitress. Heroes like Coast Guard rescue swimmer Scott Ruskin, who rescued many young girls from the deadly Texas flood. Now, these American heroes remind me of two sailors that I met this past weekend. I was on a Navy destroyer within firing distance of Iran. These sailors from Wyoming were 9 time zones away from home in Wyoming. One that I talked to is from Gillette, Wyoming. He went to Sheridan High School, was from Gillette. His father works at a coal mine in Gillette. Another from Wheatland, Wyoming. His father works at the power plant. Both of them said that President Trump and Republicans had saved their father's jobs, and they asked me to portray that, give that thanks to the president, and I did that last night as a member of the escort committee when I met with the president before he entered the chamber to deliver the State of the Union. He knows that what he's doing is making a difference for the men and women, the working men and women of our country, for the jobs in our communities, for good-paying jobs, and for American energy. That's what we're doing for America. The success that the President outlined last night is just the beginning. It's being felt by working families everywhere around the country. People are going to continue to feel that success because of our Republican comprehensive economic plan. Being from Wyoming, of course, my focus is small businesses that make our state thrive. Wyoming is proud to be a small business state. 99% of our businesses are small businesses. 2 out of 3 jobs in our state are all from small businesses. And what we're talking about is farmers, ranchers, construction workers, energy workers, so many more. People who feed our country, people who power our homes, people who make our communities better. During the previous administration, small businesses struggled. They choked on a witch's brew of higher taxes and burdensome regulations. Punishing good people for honest work did not make life in America more affordable. It made it more challenging. It led to higher costs. It led to smaller paychecks. It led to fewer jobs. That's what Biden administration and the Democrats did. But now, because of our working family tax cuts law, taxes on small businesses are going down, and they're going to stay down. The working family tax cut law is already helping create jobs. This year, in every state, new Main Street jobs are going to be created. Small businesses receive a permanent tax cut. In my home state of Wyoming, 50,000 small businesses will benefit from them. The working family tax cuts law encourages investing here at home. Small businesses can now write off 100% of their costs for new equipment. It's called full expensing. It matters to the small businesses in Main Street all along this great nation. Full expensing simply means that small businesses will be able to build more and grow faster. They can invest in their business and their workers. Faster growth means lower costs for families. It means more jobs. It means bigger paychecks. That's what the American people want. The Working Family Tax Cuts law supports farmers and ranchers. They receive major relief from the dreaded death tax, and this relief is permanent. Death tax relief has significant consequences for rural livelihoods and for feeding our country. Now families across Wyoming and your home state of Montana, Mr. President, will not have to worry about whether they can keep the farm or the ranch when grandma or grandpa passes away. They want to keep it in the family. In the past, they had to sell it to pay the tax man. That's wrong. All these changes mean immediate savings for small business owners, for their employers, as well as for their customers. This year, small business owners will receive about $27 billion in additional tax refunds. That's money in their pockets. And because these provisions are permanent, small businesses can hire, invest, and grow with confidence now and in the future. The only people who don't want this success to continue are the Democrats. People in mainstream Wyoming, and thinking of a small community in Wyoming of Newcastle, Wyoming. Great place. I go every year. They do called Madness on Main Street. All the small businesses are out. They have tables out. The firefighters do a pancake breakfast. That's what America is all about. Small communities, local community jobs, local schools where they still teach the students the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. The kids can actually recite it. They can come to They stand up. I've been in their classrooms. It's astonishing what's going on in small communities and small schools all across America. That's what President Trump was talking about and what he's doing for small business in our communities in rural America. But that's not what we saw with the Democrats. No, last night, how did they respond last night after the president's magnificent speech? Well, they chose the newly elected governor of Virginia to deliver their State of the Union response. She was sworn in just a month ago. But this is the mindset now of this far left party over there, the Democrats. Because since she was sworn in last month as the governor of Virginia, she has introduced 50 new taxes. 50 new taxes. Democrats in Virginia are trying to raise taxes on barbershops, nail salons, dry cleaners, and gyms. Every one of those, if we were talking about Newcastle, Wyoming, would hurt Newcastle, Wyoming, and the small communities in Wyoming and in your home state of Montana. But that's what Virginia wants to do. That's what the liberals that run the House, the Senate, and their new governor, who the Democrats chose as the face of the Democrat Party, somebody who's been in office for 1 month and has introduced 50 new taxes, barbershops, nail salons, dry cleaners, and gyms. Tax them all. You'll love this, Mr. President. She wants to raise sales taxes on firearms and ammunition by 11%. That's not something that works in Wyoming or Montana. She wants to give in-state tuition benefits for illegal immigrants. That's not something the American people agree on. She wants to ban gas-powered leaf blowers. She's still living in that age of focusing on the carbon footprint instead of what we need in America today, which is all the energy and affordable energy. That's who the Democrats chose to give the response. A person who wants to put sales taxes on everyday services all across the state. You know, I said it before, I'm saying it again. Democrats are committed and determined to raise your taxes. And Virginia, and what we heard from her last night, what they're doing in Virginia is just a roadmap to the radical policies that the Democrats want all over this country. Remember, it was the Democrats under Joe Biden who brought us the worst inflation in 40 years. Democrats who voted last year to raise taxes by $4 trillion. Democrats stood for higher taxes last night, but not for tax cuts, not for working Americans, not for American heroes, not for the priorities of the safety of the American people. Nope. Democrat agenda continues to be higher taxes, higher prices that the American people cannot afford. Mr. President, affordability isn't improved by taxing and by spending more government money. It's improved by allowing the American people to keep more of what they earn so they can make the decisions for themselves of what to spend, what to save, what to invest. Americans are better off today because Republicans cut taxes, because we protect farmers and ranchers, because we support small businesses. And after just 1 year, inflation is falling, wages are rising, and more Americans are working. This is the great American economic comeback. This is what we heard from the President last night. This is what we are proud of as a record of providing safety and prosperity for the American people. And there is more work to be done, as the President said. Our nation is returning to a position of safety, security, and prosperity. And for small businesses in Wyoming and all across America, the future is bright. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The distinguished other senator of Wyoming.
And I'm so pleased to join my esteemed colleague from Wyoming in this next presentation where we rejoice and celebrate our Olympians. Last night was an incredible display of Americana, of the joy of celebrating our athletes. And it was particularly joyous when our gold medal U.S. Olympic hockey team came into the gallery in their beautiful USA sweaters with their gold medals around their necks. So every American who was watching the State of the Union last night could join with them to celebrate this tremendous achievement and to have a moment where America was rejoicing together over something that's so quintessentially a North American sport and a triumph for our Olympic teams. Today, I want to continue that joyous celebration by congratulating and highlighting and punctuating 3 Wyoming athletes who were at the U.S. Olympic Games in Italy. The 3 are Breezy Johnson, Anna Gibson of Jackson, and Jalen Koff of Alta. Mr. President, they did not just compete, they embodied grit, resilience, and the determination that really defines Wyoming. And I have no doubt they inspired every person in Wyoming, especially our young student athletes who watched them on TV. I was so overjoyed that I got to watch Breezy Johnson's win in real time. Breezy Johnson got America's medal run off to a tremendous start. Her race was early in the Olympic Games. And she took the gold medal in the women's skiing downhill, racing nearly 80 miles an hour to the finish line. It was an incredible moment for our country, incredible, and truly incredible moment for Wyoming. In addition to Breezy's gold medal, she also came home with a fiance. So congratulations to Breezy and Connor. We're so happy for you both. Jalen Koff made history by becoming the most decorated Olympic mogul skier in U.S. history, earning her 2nd and 3rd career silver medals. From learning to ski in Teton Valley to competing on the world's greatest stage, Jalen's journey reflects years of discipline, perseverance, and unwavering community support. The strength that is required in your legs to be a mogul skier is absolutely unparalleled. Through 2 Olympic Games, she has represented Alta and the United States with exceptional courage and joy. We could not be prouder. Anna Gibson became the very first American to compete in Olympic ski mountaineering, which is a relatively new sport in the Olympics, finishing 4th alongside her partner in a sport she grew up with in Jackson. Anna demonstrated the courage to step into uncharted territory. As I said, it's a very new sport. And stepping into uncharted territory is a quality Wyoming knows well. So she just did a bang-up job representing Wyoming and the United States in our Skimo Olympic debut. Mr. President, these 3 women remind us that greatness is not born in stadiums, but it's built in gymnasiums and on training courses and on ski mountains and early morning trainings, in weight rooms, in your diet, your exercise, and particularly in tight-knit communities that support these athletes. These communities believe in one another. They believe and celebrate each other's hard work. Wyoming's always stood for toughness, independence, and quiet excellence. Breezy, Jalen, and Anna carried that spirit with them to the world stage. They made Wyoming and the entire country so proud. Mr. President, we are lucky to call them ours. I yield back.
Senator Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise alongside my friend and colleague, Senator Lummis, to celebrate these 3 talented Olympians, Breezy Johnson, Jalen Koff, and Anna Gibson. The 2026 Olympic Games were the most successful winter games in our nation's history. Team USA won an astonishing 12 gold medals. It's the most gold medals our country has ever won in the Winter Olympics. America brought home the second most medals of any country, 33 medals overall. This was a record-setting year for Team USA, and Wyoming is no small part of the success. Breezy started the historic medal run that first day by winning our nation's first gold medal at the 2026 Games, by winning women's downhill alpine skiing. Her victory comes just 4 years after she was forced to withdraw in the 2022 Olympics due to injuries sustained on the very mountain that she conquered in 2026. Her comeback is an inspiring story for every young American who aspires to a day as an Olympic athlete. Jalen Koff was next. She took home 2 silver medals in mogul skiing. She is now a 3-time Olympic silver medalist, and that makes her the most decorated mogul skier in U.S. Olympic history. And everyone in Wyoming is so very proud of Anna Gibson. I mean, look at that, the determination, the look in her, and what a sport. As Senator Lummis just remembered, this is the first year for ski mountaineering in the Olympics, and it was Anna's first Olympics ever. She made history as the first American woman to compete in ski mountaineering at the Olympic Winter Games. She finished in 4th place and accomplished this even though, incredibly, she picked up this event only a few months ago. But I'll tell you, she's a trailblazer, as are all of these Olympic athletes. Watching her event on Saturday, I saw a Wyoming flag waving in the crowd and cheering her on. The people of Wyoming always show up for one another. You know, in Wyoming, we follow the cowboy code. Live each day with courage, take pride in your work, and do what needs to be done. So congratulations to our Wyoming Olympic champions. They've done so much to make history. We're so very proud of all of them. They make our state and our nation very proud. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator of Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the DeLue nomination.
Without objection.
Mr. President, as the whole world knows, yesterday evening President Trump gave his State of the Union address. It is one of our country's finest traditions that the President personally gives an update to the American people on what he has done over the last year before a joint session of Congress and what he intends to do in the future. It was an exciting night with members of the House, Senate, and Supreme Court gathered along with our military leadership to hear about the impressive year that we have had under President Trump here in the Congress and, of course, at the White House. And as we just heard from our friends from Wyoming, we had an appearance from the USA's men's hockey team, who recently won the gold medal at the Olympics. And the President recognized, appropriately so many of our nation's heroes in a tremendous display of patriotism that I know I welcomed. Unfortunately, many of our Democratic colleagues disgracefully chose to boycott the President's address. But their collective temper tantrum couldn't stop the rest of us from enjoying the President's speech. I was honored to have as my guest the President of the National Border Patrol Council, Paul Perez, who's worked for 29 years in the U.S. Border Patrol and who's done a magnificent job leading that organization of incredible patriots when Democrats have demonized law enforcement across the country, starting with defunding the police, abolishing ICE, and of course then the disrespectful way that President Biden's administration treated all of our professional law enforcement officers whose job it was to secure the border. As we heard last night, President Trump has many achievements that we can all be very proud of, from securing the border from the massive surge of illegal immigration our country experienced during the Biden administration to reestablishing Americans' credibility on the world stage. But one of the accomplishments that I'd like to highlight today is the improvement in our nation's fiscal situation through the Working Family Tax Cuts Act and the work of the Office of Management and Budget Director Russ Vought. Now, this may be the first speech on the Senate floor in a long time that's praised Russ Vought and the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, but I think praise is due, as you'll hear in a moment. Through the Working Family Tax Cuts, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, we were able to extend and make permanent many parts of President Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Unfortunately, no Democrat voted to protect the American people from a massive tax increase. It took exclusively Republican votes to do that. We prevented more than a $4 million tax increase on the American people and saved my constituents in Texas an average of $3,000. Now, people want to talk about affordability. Allowing a $3,000 tax increase to go into effect by effectively voting against this bill certainly does nothing to make affordability better. It makes it worse. But Republicans stepped forward where Democrats would not in order to answer the call and respond to the needs of our constituents. We help working families by increasing the child tax credit to $2,200 and indexing it to inflation. So people who have children and who have the additional expense associated with that will have some relief, have some money to basically pay for their necessities of life. And we strengthened the family paid and medical leave and employer-provided child care credit. One of the things I hear the most from working moms is the difficulty of finding affordable child care. We responded by the paid family and medical leave and employer-provided child care credits by incentivizing employers to provide child care to their employees, allowing working moms the peace of mind and the convenience of having child care for their children. And we delivered historic relief to hourly wage workers as well, like folks who work in restaurants. I think most of us, I know I did, when I first started out, I waited on tables at a steak and ale restaurant in San Antonio, Texas. And I know from talking to a lot of young people who are just starting out, as I did at that point in my life, that they are welcoming the fact that now they don't have to pay taxes on income from tips up to $25,000. But it doesn't just affect people who wait on tables in restaurants. Hairstylists, anyone who receives tips as part of their compensation will benefit. And then there's no tax on overtime. You know, many of our law enforcement personnel work more than 40 hours a week because, frankly, they don't get paid sufficiently by just working a 40-hour week. So many of them work overtime. And they're not alone. But by saying no tax on overtime, we not only provide American businesses the workforce that they need, but also reward people who are willing to continue to work hard and provide for their families to make sure they can keep more of their hard-earned money. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime. Of course, in addition to these, there are many other savings for the American people. President Trump made significant strides in getting our fiscal house in order by starting to rein in runaway government spending. Our national debt currently sits at about $38 trillion. And I know that number boggles the mind. None of us can really adequately conceive of how much that is. But here's one indication. We spend more money on interest on the national debt than we do on defense. which is unsustainable in a dangerous world. Thankfully, President Trump has made a commitment to request $1.5 trillion for defense spending next year. But the truth is, unless we begin to deal with our runaway debt, that money is just going to be borrowed. And we need to do better. We need to do significantly better. But the good news is we made a down payment in the Working Family Tax Cuts Act, saving $400 billion over 10 years. You may think, well, 38 trillion, 400 billion, that's just a drop in the ocean, but it's a start, and we need to do more, and I trust that we will. We have to. As many people know, our national debt is actually not a revenue problem. It's not how much it's not that we don't collect enough taxes, as our friends on the Democratic side seem to think. They don't think there's any tax that shouldn't be raised. It's a spending problem. I just came from a hearing on the Senate Judiciary Committee where a new anti-fraud prosecutor has been nominated by President Trump. He testified that what we saw happen in the Somali daycare scandal is just the tip of the iceberg. Make-believe non-governmental organizations providing non-existent daycare services and bilking the American taxpayer billions of dollars. The Government Accountability Office has documented that there is between $200 to $500 billion of improper payments. That is money that should not be paid to the recipient of those funds. And part of it is structural, it seems to me, because when the federal government appropriates money, much of that money is then contracted out to service providers or grantees or the like. But one of the things we have to do is to make sure that there is accountability for those funds and they are being spent for its intended purpose. Not that they're being siphoned off by fraudsters and people that are taking advantage of the generosity of the American people. But it's not just about the fraudsters and the generosity of the American people. It's about this is money that could be used to address our debt and to make sure we can allocate the money that we do spend for proper purposes, like maintaining our national security. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to spending, you know, the saying goes, somebody's spending like a drunken sailor, which shows a lot of disrespect to sailors. And unfortunately, it's much, much worse than that. It is like the mindset of an alcoholic, given into the addiction, accepting the notion that our current situation is hopeless. So we might as well enjoy ourselves in the meantime. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. Time and time again, we hear such tropes as, well, the real problem is mandatory spending, so why should we even try to cut discretionary spending? Well, we need to look at all of it. We shouldn't shy away from any and all conversations when it comes to addressing our spending problem. But the truth is, just like someone with an addiction to alcohol or gambling who wants to reform, you got to start somewhere. And last year, we made important reforms in our mandatory spending programs to make sure that, for example, illegal aliens don't receive free health care, and strengthening work requirements for able-bodied adults who are receiving government benefits. It's not too much to ask that an able-bodied adult get off the couch, quit watching soap operas or playing video games, and contribute to their own support and the support of their family and their community and nation. It's not too much to ask. But I would argue that we need more than just trimming around the edges, but we need a full change of mindset when it comes to our spending problem. That's where Russ Vought comes in. Russ Vought is President Trump's director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, and he has helped create a paradigm shift that Washington has long needed in order to get our spending under control. Instead of throwing up his hands, as many in Washington have done before him, Mr. Vought and his team have put their noses to the grindstone to cut spending anywhere and everywhere possible. Under his leadership, the Office of Management and Budget are on track to reduce the deficit by more than $15 trillion over the next 10 years. That's real money. So let's take a look at some of the places where these savings are coming from. For starters, mandatory spending reforms in Medicaid, student loan forgiveness, and food stamps will add up to $2 trillion in savings over the next 10 years. Revenue from President Trump's tariffs add up to another $200 billion, which the Office of Management and Budget projects will erase $4 trillion in debt over time. In addition, deregulation, taking the handcuffs off of the huge American jobs engine, and tax reforms are expected to spur economic growth, which the Office of Management and Budget projects will account for an additional $5.6 trillion in savings. OMB's projections include nearly $2 trillion in savings from lower debt servicing payments. So not only is the debt the problem, but the interest you have to pay on that debt just racks up more debt. But when you begin to cut, that debt service or those interest payments go down, which help address the issue. Now, this is where it gets pretty interesting. With such a high national debt, our debt servicing costs or the interest payments on the debt have eclipsed spending on national defense, as I said a moment ago. This is a very troubling sign when we spend more money on interest on the national debt than we do on defense. But the good news is that in the same way that paying off a credit card can reduce your monthly payments, interest payments, through these spending reforms championed by Mr. Vought and the administration, they will decrease our interest expenses on our debt. And over 10 years, that can really add up. I was recently with Secretary Bissett, the Secretary of the Treasury, and he shared that the government is projected to save between $26 and $30 billion due to reduction in the federal workforce. Mr. Vought's determination has encouraged those of us here in Congress who are inclined toward fiscal responsibility to return to the regular order appropriations process and pump the brakes on continuing resolutions and omnibus spending packages, which have been the norm for a long time. Fortunately, we've refrained from passing an omnibus spending package this Congress, but we've also made progress through regular order appropriations on lowering year-over-year spending. Fiscal year 2026 non-defense discretionary spending totaled $18 billion less than 2025, and overall spending levels were about $1 billion less. And of course, while $1 billion may sound like pocket change compared to our national debt, again, it's heading in the right direction. Considering the totality of what President Trump and his Office of Management and Budget have done, it is incredible to see that he's put the United States on track to erase not just billions, but trillions in projected spending over the next 10 years. For too long, Washington has limited our imagination to think that our fiscal situation is hopeless. We have no choice. President Trump and the excellent team he's put in place have changed all of that. All of us should be thankful for the excellent work that the President and OMB Director Vought and his team have done to meaningfully shift our fiscal situation in the right direction save taxpayer money, and protect our nation. Of course, this work on taxes and spending represents just one small piece of the President's impressive record, as we were reminded last night. President Trump is helping to make America great again, and his State of the Union was a powerful reflection on how far we've come this last year and what the future might look like, the bright future look like ahead of us. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator Nebraska.
I ask unanimous consent that the following senators be permitted to speak prior to the scheduled roll call vote. Senator Cantwell for up to 10 minutes, Senator Ricketts for up to 5 minutes, Senator Moreno for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
And since Senator Cantwell is not here, I'll go ahead and get my program rolling. Mr. President, Nebraska is the best place in the world to live. Nebraska is what America is supposed to be. Sadly, in Nebraska, the dream that most Americans have of home ownership is also becoming more difficult, just as it is in the rest of the country. First-time home ownership in this country is difficult because housing is expensive, hard to get. In fact, the average age of a first-time homeowner in America today is 40. 10 years ago, that was 31. And it's red tape that is helping to drive up the cost of homes, red tape and regulation. In fact, it's estimated that 25% of the cost of a new home is actually regulation. And if you're talking about an apartment building, that's actually 40% of the cost of an apartment building is regulation. This is not a new problem. It's been around for a while. When I was governor, we faced the same issues, especially in rural Nebraska. When I was governor, I worked with my legislature, and we passed our Rural Workforce Housing Act. And we dedicated $7 million, and we created this fund that communities and developers could apply to. And what many communities did is they got this grant money, and they created essentially a revolving fund to be able to loan out to developers to allow them to either get bridge funding or cover some of the costs. And ultimately, those developers and communities would repay that fund back to the communities, who could then loan it back out again. And this was very successful. It allowed us to be able to encourage developers to move outside of Lincoln and Omaha and build housing in our smaller towns and rural communities. In fact, it was so successful, we went back and added another $10 million to that. And it's these kind of Nebraska solutions that I am bringing to Washington, D.C. for the rest of America. How can we create more housing supply to address the issue, to bring the cost of housing down? That is what we need to attack here in Washington, D.C. And in fact, that is what we were doing in the Banking Committee. With the leadership of Chairman Scott, we have put forward the Renewing Opportunity of the American Dream Act, or Road to Housing Act. And this bill came out of our Banking Committee unanimously, because both Republicans and Democrats understand the need to create more housing supply to address the issue of home ownership in America. The House has a similar bill that came out of their committee nearly unanimously. And now I expect that within the next few weeks, we will be voting on the Road to Housing Act here on the floor of the U.S. Senate. In this bill, the Road to Housing Act, I have a piece that I introduced called Streamlining the Rural Housing Act. And this is because many rural communities draw upon both housing and urban development money, as well as United States Agricultural Department money, to be able to create more housing supply. However, both HUD and USDA have conflicting or overlapping regulations that create confusion and adds red tape. What my part of the Road to Housing Act would do would help streamline that, so that we're not doing things in series, we're doing them in parallel, that we're actually trying to consolidate the review and inspection process, all those sort of things that would actually help us get that money out faster, which would create housing supply faster, which would help bring down the cost of housing. I also co-sponsor the Housing Supply Framework Act. And this is a bill that was led by one of my colleagues in my delegation, Congressman Mike Flood, and it really helps create a framework or best practices for zoning to be able to help communities look to see what they can do with regard to their zoning practices to be able to, again, encourage building housing that will create more supply, which will bring the costs down. The Road to Housing Act is an important step. It's how we're fighting for Americans to be able to create the opportunities for home ownership, to fight to allow those families to achieve the American dream, to be able to own their own home, which is so important to so many Americans. It's often their first big investment. It's how they create wealth. It truly is one of the things that makes this country great. If we can pass the Road to Housing Act, we'll be able to help cut the red tape that exists there. We'll be able to unlock billions of dollars in private capital. This will help us create more supply and bring the cost down. This bill is great for American families, for our veterans, and for helping people achieve the American dream. And it's especially great for our rural communities. As governor of Nebraska, we worked very hard to be able to create more housing supply. I am so pleased to be able to be here in the U.S. Senate, to be able to continue to fighting to make that dream of affordable home ownership, again, something that Americans can aspire to in this country. I encourage all of my colleagues to support the Road to Housing Act so we can pass this important piece of legislation to be able to help make housing more affordable for Americans and help restore that dream of home ownership to Nebraskans and Americans all across this country. With that, Mr. President, I yield my time. Thank you.
Senator Ohio.
I rise today to propose a very simple bill that I think most Americans can understand. It says a very simple basic principle. If you're on any type of government aid, you are restricted from sending money overseas. Pretty straightforward. We want to help American citizens who are in need, but if they're in need, why would they need to send money overseas? And I would just say this, Mr. President, a nation's strength lies in its people's ability to sustain themselves and their countrymen first. To divert public benevolence overseas weakens the bonds of union at home, inviting dependence where independence should prevail. We can allow the fruits of American labor meant to nourish our own be scattered to foreign soils. True charity begins with securing the liberties and livelihoods of our fellow citizens. Government aid is a ladder for the American worker to climb from poverty to prosperity. To send it beyond our borders is to weaken that ladder, denying our people the fruits of their own toil and the promise of a more perfect union. We have framed laws to protect our citizens from poverty's grasp, ensuring homes, livelihoods, and security for Americans. Diverting those resources overseas betrays that compact, for our progress is measured by providing for those who have little within our own shores. And finally, I'd say this, Mr. President. Welfare should lift Americans up, not fund foreign dependencies. When those on public aid send money overseas, it's a sign the system is broken, trapping people in poverty while draining our nation's hard-earned resources from those who need it at home the most. So, Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Finance Committee be discharged from further consideration of as 3746 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator Morgan.
Mr. President, this legislation prohibits any individual, senior citizens, people with disabilities, our veterans, refugees, and the poorest of the poor from sending money to friends or family overseas for any reason. That prohibition includes American citizens as well. So if you're a veteran who served our country and who counts on your VA benefits, you better not provide any financial support to your grandmother living abroad, or under this legislation, you could be fined $100,000. The legislation comes straight from a very cruel playbook. First, target public programs that provide a lifeline to low and middle income people. Second, smear the recipients of this help by characterizing them as fraudsters. And third, use the exaggerated claims as a pretext to slash funding. That was the playbook at the heart of the Republicans' major legislation, which made the biggest ever cuts to health care and food assistance in the history of America. Why were those awful cuts made that are causing hospitals to shutter their labor and delivery units and slash staff? To fund the ICE surge that's led to untrained federal agents roaming the streets of Americans' communities, committing violence with impunity. That major legislation also lavished tax breaks onto the ultra-wealthy while doing nothing to crack down on the billions that wealthy tax cheats don't pay their fair share with each year. This legislation represents a dark heart of the Republican agenda, scapegoat those who don't have a voice while letting the wealthy and well-connected get off the hook. And if my colleagues on the other side really were worried about money leaving the United States, I can tell you, as the ranking Democrat on the Finance Committee, they can look at their own tax laws that encourage giant corporations to ship jobs and factories overseas. They ought to figure out why the Trump economy is driving investors and their dollars away from America into foreign markets. It would be an understatement to say this legislation is a solution in search of a problem. This legislation is obviously some kind of messaging bill that would challenge the very foundations of what draws people from all over the world to America, the chance to imagine and create a better life for themselves and their family. For those reasons, I object and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The objection is heard. Senator from Ohio.
So to my colleague from Oregon, who I don't really know well, let me just say this. As somebody who actually came to this country from a foreign land legally, I find it decently insulting that you would paint a picture of immigrants coming here to be dependent on the government. Let me just tell you the exact opposite is true. But that is actually the playbook of the Democrat Party, smearing with racist undertones immigrants, thinking that the only reason we would ever come to America is to be dependent on government. But let me just be clear to the Americans out there who want to understand what's actually happening in D.C., because I've only been here 13 months. My colleague's been here for 30 years. When you've been here for 30 years in Washington, D.C., you think it's perfectly normal for government to provide aid to those in need and then have those people send that money overseas. To them, that's normal. And in terms of your comment to my colleague from Oregon, that we are shipping jobs overseas or incentivizing companies to send jobs overseas, welcome to the Republican Party's position on tariffs. I'm happy to see, finally, that we have a Democrat who's willing to embrace tariffs because we're sick and tired of seeing our jobs shipped overseas. So while I'm disappointed that we couldn't agree on a basic premise that U.S. taxpayer dollars intended to help our citizens stay within our shores should highlight why yesterday the Democrat members of both houses could not stand up when President Trump asked a simple question. Is it the first duty of an elected official to defend and protect American citizens? And you were there, Mr. President. Not a single Democrat could stand up. I yield the floor.
Since my colleague is talking about my family's background, he might be interested to know my parents fled the Nazis in the 30s. Not all got out. And we were especially proud of my two parents who weren't at all interested in coming to America for any benefits. As my colleague is suggesting, they persuaded themselves that they should be in our army. My dad was one of the famous Ritchie boys, renowned for their service to the country, writing the propaganda pamphlets we dropped on the Nazis. So my colleague is way off base with his comments about my family. And finally, you might want to do some checking. When I first read this, I thought maybe my colleague and his staff just didn't get the text written correctly, because the people who are really upset now are the veterans, people who wore the uniform of the United States, who my colleague is putting in a hardship situation, according to the staff. But I yield my time, and I just wanted to make sure the record was correct, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator Ohio.
I will remind the Senator of Senate Rule 19, I in no way disparaged your family, didn't even mention your family. What I did mention is that you made the point that we're harming immigrants who come here who might be dependent on social safety net programs from sending that money back overseas. And I came here from another country, not my parents. I came here. I wasn't born in this country. I came here to seek the American dream, and I'm honored every day to be here, although a day like today, not so much. Because it's grossly disappointing to think that the Democrat Party that I once knew, a party of the working class, is not willing to make a very simple statement. When we help American citizens, we expect that money to stay in this country. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator Washington.
Mr. President, I come to speak about the opposition to the nominee before us that we're going to vote on soon, Mr. John DeLue. It's not necessarily about Mr. DeLue's qualifications. It's about the dangerous precedent we are making as we confirm someone to replace an independent NTSB board member who was removed by the president without cause while they are actively challenging this removal in court. And it's about a needless jeopardizing of public confidence in NTSB critical work, which I'll speak about in a minute, particularly as it relates to the House not taking up the Roeder Act on suspension yesterday, a bill that we passed by 100 votes here in the United States Senate. But it has been less than 2 years since this body unanimously confirmed Alvin Brown to be on the NTSB. The Senate's overwhelming support for Mr. Brown should not be surprising. As a former mayor of Jacksonville, Florida, and a former senior advisor to the Department of Transportation, Mr. Brown's background and experience qualified him to be on the NTSB. My colleague, Senator Scott of Florida, introduced Mr. Brown at his nomination hearing before the Commerce Committee, praising his, quote, excellent record of service, end quote, and noting that he would, quote, do excellent work on behalf of the American people in this role, end quote. Senator Scott's prediction that Mr. Brown would focus on the NTSB and safety shortly after he was sworn in, he began conducting critical work on the NTSB's investigation into the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which killed 6 people and caused billions of dollars in damage. He was also leading the NTSB's response to the March 13, 2025 highway accident on Interstate 35 in Austin, Texas, that killed 5 people and injured 11 more. But seeking to unravel Congress's will and insert its own will, even though we voted on this gentleman and he's serving the NTSB, focusing on safety, the White House basically is trying to remove Mr. Brown and replace him with Mr. DeLue. As I stated earlier, Mr. Brown has filed a lawsuit challenging his removal. This remains in the courts and pending. The Supreme Court is prepared to rule this year on this decision to bring legal clarity to Mr. Brown's case. So I asked my colleagues, why are we rushing to confirm Mr. DeLue to a seat that isn't even really vacant under current law? Why would we needlessly create confusion, especially when the Supreme Court is expected to rule on this issue very soon? And why would the Senate allow the executive branch to undermine the confidence in the independence of the National Transportation Safety Board? As we pointed out, moving ahead with this nomination before us, Mr. DeLue's, is especially problematic when the White House has still not nominated a single member of the opposing party to any independent board or commission, including the NTSB. I guarantee you that is not the way the FTC, the FCC, the NTSB, you are undermining the confidence in these agencies and the fact that we have both Democrats and Republicans who are supposed to serve on them. So this is not about might makes right. This is about policy and expertise and having both Democrats and Republicans on commissions so that you can continue the focus of bipartisan adherence to these principles that each agency is supposed to profess confidence in and move forward on. So do we want an FTC that's driven just purely by politics, an FCC that's purely driven by the president's will or desire? Do we want an NTSB decided by the President of the United States? I guarantee you we don't, because yesterday he couldn't deliver a vote on the House floor that would have gotten us the Rotor Act, 100 votes in the United States Senate, and he couldn't do that, but he's going to tell us over our processes and over historical history about how Democrat and Republican nominees should be appointed. He's throwing the Democrats off, appointing his own person, and then basically leaving into question how strong is the NTSB really going to be on safety. Congress established the NTSB in law as an independent agency. It reauthorized the agency as recently as 2024. So if all of a sudden everybody here didn't want to have appointments to the NTSB by the normal process, well, you could have had a big chance to say you didn't like that. But nobody did. In fact, we renewed it. So we should now not be rewarding the president's unlawful removal of Vice Chair Brown by rushing to confirm a nominee in a position that is not really vacant. I call on my Republican colleagues not to go down this path, instead uphold the constitutional duty to provide checks and balances and protect the American people. Now, Mr. President, as I was mentioning yesterday, unbelievable failure of the House of Representatives to pass what this body did as one of the elements in response to the horrific crash on the Potomac when an Army helicopter collided with a commercial jet carrying 67 individuals that were involved in this accident. No one survived. So the Senate, starting this work, has really pushed the Rotor Act out with 100 votes. It literally said the military has to, in this instance, provide the same kind of signaling and information that would allow this airspace to work. 100 votes out of the United States Senate. And as my colleague, Senator Cruz from Texas, tried to get this legislation passed as part of the NDAA, everybody said, okay, you know what, we'll do this, but we just don't want to do it on this NDAA bill. Okay, that should have raised suspicion right then and there, because if this is one of the recommendations by the NTSB, oh, actually, it's not one of the recent recommendations of the NTSB. This recommendation has been out of the NTSB for 20 years. 20 years the NTSB has been saying that they believe that this kind of important awareness in space of air around airports needs to be better coordinated. And so for 20 plus years now, the NTSB has been making this recommendation. And smartly, after the tragic accident that took 67 lives, we passed legislation out of here, 100 votes, and my colleague, Senator Cruz, was promised by the Speaker that he would get this on the consent calendar. Oh, so yesterday that's what happened. A vote in the House of Representatives, the consent calendar. That means there's not really opposition, and you can just get 2/3 of the body and get the bill expedited, and it would have gone to the president's desk. But no, that's not what happened yesterday. At the 11th hour, people tried to subvert the will of the families that were there to talk about safety, subvert the NTSB from doing its job and advocating on behalf of the Rotor Act, and all of a sudden, after a vote was closed quickly, one vote short, this bill did not make it to the president's desk. So I'm calling on Speaker Johnson to get the 26 members who were unable to participate in this vote because of weather in the Northeast, to allow them to come back, schedule another vote, and allow the United States House of Representatives to do its job. Get the Rotor Act onto the president's desk so he can sign it and we can get safety, and let's move about the other reforms that have to happen to the FAA so that we can assure that our airspace is safe. I thank the president, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Ohio.
I have 6 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion.
Sorry.
We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22, the standing rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of John DeLue of Texas to be a member of the National Transportation Safety Board for the remainder of the term expiring December 31st, 2026, signed by 17 senators.
Under the previous order, the mandatory quorum call under Rule 22 has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of John DeLue of Texas to be a member of the National Transportation Safety Board for the remainder of the term expiring December 31st, 2026 shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Banks. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Blunt-Rochester. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Britt. Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King,